Well, hello to you here in the room and at home or in the office in front of the screens. My name is Patrick Schmucki. I am the co-lead of the Financial Service Climate and Sustainability team at KPMG. And I welcome you to our session today, co-hosted by the Global Alliance for Banking on Values and KPMG on our session called Driving Purposeful Cultures in Banking. I still remember the first time I learned about the importance of culture. It was way back in the days when I had just started as an audit assistant, and we were at a meeting with the board, with the chairman of the board and the CEO of a bank that had just gone through a insider trading incident that was in the media. And as we went over what had happened and why it had happened and how it could be avoided in the future, I still remember the chairman of the board, at some point he said, I think we need to acknowledge that we have a culture problem in this institution. And the importance and the influence of culture has been called back to my mind time and time again over the years, for example, by regulators who have started introducing individual accountability regimes, culture audits, and supervision approaches for behavior and culture, attempting to regulate or address the underlying drivers of conduct failures. I was also very lucky with my career to speak to or interview senior leaders who stated that their unique culture at their firm was at the root of their competitive advantage. And only yesterday, at the Building Bridges Summit, we heard about the necessity for culture change and refocus on value being an important precondition to catch up on our goals towards the sustainable development goals. So really the question in my mind is, why is something so powerful like culture so little understood? There is quite a bit of literature and definitely also opinions around the influencing factors like accountability, incentives, individual values, control, environment, diversity, and so on and so on. But today, we want to talk about a factor which we think is not only paramount, but probably fundamental in its importance for a healthy corporate culture, and that is purpose. So why is purpose important? Purpose gives direction. And when I'm looking at the projects I've done, the ESG implementation projects in the broader sense I've done with clients, there wasn't one who wasn't struggling with the different, sometimes even contradicting expectations of the stakeholders they had to deal with. And let's be honest, a bank cannot be everything to everybody. Banks have limited resources just like other firms, and they have to deal with trade-offs. So purpose provides direction to resolve these conflicts and tensions in a systematic, credible, and authentic manner. Just today, we launched a publication that you can download using this QR code, which provides a framework that can navigate a financial institution and any firm through identifying and implementing purpose in its organization. And I'll give you a quick run through this framework. So what you're going to need first is actually articulate your purpose. What is your purpose? The purpose is your firm's origin story. It is your raison d'être, and it is therefore found in the past. It could be the initial intention of the founders or founder of the organization when he started off the business, or it could be the collective stories of the employees that make them proud to be part of the organization. From practice, we know that only few financial institutions have purpose or mission statements, and if they have them, they use the top-line stories usually around providing long-term value for shareholders. But this is not about purpose. A purpose statement should be no longer than one sentence, and it should contain 3 major components. Your why. That is the contribution you want to make to the broader world. Your who, which is the stakeholders that you're particularly passionate about serving, and your so what, which is the impact that you're hoping to have with your products and services on those stakeholders. Another important thing is that your purpose statement is focused and selective. If your purpose statement feels uneasy, it's probably where you want to be, because only then it will provide the guidance that you need to make the really tough decisions in the business and to serve as a benchmark for all the major decisions that the board and the senior management is going to make. Arguably, the most challenging step is the embedding. And it's such a broad topic, we could have a summit only on it alone. But and anyway, in just a few minutes, we'll hear from truly purpose-driven organizations how they are dealing with the implementation of their purpose on a day-to-day basis. But what I want to talk about briefly is 3 points on the tone from the top and its importance for purpose. So the first point I want to talk about is the role of the board. And in my opinion, the purpose should be a formal duty of the board. Every major decision of the board should be checked against its compliance with the corporate purpose. The board should also assess whether the purpose is really lived in its organization. It should assess the culture, not only in the boardroom, but in the broader organization, the values, the quality of the leadership, to really get an understanding what's happening in the firm. People will do the right thing if they are within the broader culture that celebrates and rewards such behavior. If the board becomes aware of a culture of fear or good news developing, it must act. The second point I want to make is about diversity. There is an increasing body of sociological and psychological research that suggests that the presence of character traits such as compassion, kindness, and charity is decreasing the higher up you go in an organization. So what that seems to suggest is that leaders might primarily be driven by personal status rather than the common good. What this highlights is the need for character traits, values, to be integral part of the recruiting and appointments of senior leadership. What's needed is a true diversity in mindset in the leadership team of a bank, which obviously transcends factors like gender and race. And the last point is the need for principle-based management. So what I'm going to say now is probably going to shock you a bit to hear from a Big Four consultant. So in this, what I'm saying is regulation isn't always the answer. I'll just let that sink in for a second. So if there's something I've learned in working my entire career of 15 years in regulation is that what regulation does is it removes people responsibility for deciding what's wrong and what's right. And there has been and will be a place for regulation in any financial institution. But what I'm also saying is that behavior and culture are fluid and judgmental. And for me, there's an inherent conflict in applying binary compliance tools to something like that. What I'm advocating instead is that firms cultivate behaviors that are based on people-centric principles rather than rules-based processes. And then the last step is communication. So due to the recent regulatory pressures, which you would all be aware of, there's already a lot being done in the area of non-financial reporting. And I already see certain tendencies arising here. So rather than saying what you should be doing, I will give you my 2 predictions of what I think is already happening now or where we are moving towards. My prediction number 1 is that the common forum of shareholder calls will be expanded to stakeholder calls, where the financial and non-financial performance of firms will be discussed with the broader stakeholder groups. What I really suggest firms use these forums for is to discuss which KPIs they are really interested in, that they are really focused on, especially since we are moving into a world where we're moving towards hundreds of KPIs that are being disclosed. So which ones are the stakeholders really focused on? What are their expectations towards progress? And where do they see the firm vis-à-vis their competitors? The second prediction is about monetization of impacts. I'm going to be honest with you, I was really struggling to put that one on the list, but I was very inspired by Patrick Audier's speech yesterday about being bold and brave, so that is what I'm going to do. So my prediction is that in the future, firms will be reporting on less KPIs, but those KPIs that they report on, they will report on monetized impacts. And that will have 2 major advantages. First of all, it allows for an integrated financial and non-financial performance measurement of the firm. And secondly, it resolves the basic issue that it is difficult to connect to actions that firms take today with the future impacts those actions will have. So, to the conclusion, why is purpose so important? Just coming back to yesterday's building bridges, we need a change in mindset. We need a refocus on values. So, what the GABV and KPMG are offering you to bring to this discussion is our recommendation to make purpose a central part of that discussion, not because firms have to, but because it is the right thing to do. But now, enough theory. I'm very happy to welcome Martin Rohner, the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Banking and Wealth, to the board, who will tell you something about the organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick Schmucki, and I found it very inspiring to hear a representative of one of the big 4 make a call against regulation and for more purpose. And I think that's really where this conversation, I think, should start. So the Global Alliance for Banking on Values is a movement of thought leaders, of front-runners in banking and finance that are putting finance at the service of people and planet. Now, that might sound a little bit trivial, but in reality, what it also says is that they are not primarily driven by profit. Our member banks are also profitable. In fact, I would say it's the other way around. Because they are putting people and planet squarely at the core of their business model, they are extremely successful. And I think we will be hearing about that in a moment when my colleagues join me here in the front. I would like to ask our panelists to join me. We have 3 distinguished members from the GABV, from the Global Alliance for Banking and Values. David Reiling, who is the CEO of Sunrise Banks in Minneapolis. He also happens to be the chair of the Global Alliance for Banking and Values. Then I would like to ask Hadewig Cooper, who is the managing director of Triodos Investment Management, which is the impact investing arm of Triodos Bank in the Netherlands. Please join us here in the front. And I'm very happy to also welcome Abbas Hassan, who is the executive director of the Aga Khan Agency for Microfinance. But Abbas is actually here to represent another member of ours, which is First Microfinance Bank in Afghanistan. He's a board member of FMFB Afghanistan. So I think the 3 representatives you see here at the front give you an idea of the diversity of our movement, which is very strongly held together by the values. But before we start, I would like to start with a short video. So I think that gives you a sense of who we are, I hope, and where we are present. And I would like to kick off this conversation by asking my colleagues who are here today, how are their banks driving purposeful culture? We want to hear from practitioners. And I'll actually start with you, David, and Sunrise Banks. You're running a fast-growing bank in Minneapolis. I think your bank is aspiring to become the world's most socially responsible bank. So
Very inspirational.
So how are you driving purposeful culture in banking?
Thank you, Martin, and good morning, everyone. Great to be with you this morning and talk about a subject that I very near and dear to my heart. I would say the simple answer to that is really 2 words. It's intentionality and it's embedded. And those are the beginning frameworks. So how do you look at this intentionality and this integration into an organization? It really starts before you even hire a person. It's how you think about marketing a new position in your organization. And that it's not just a skill set, but you're looking for a values fit. A person who fits the values of the institution, in our case, the bank. And that is what you're not only doing in the job description, but then in the interview itself. And so while I might ask some questions in regards to your skill set and your background, I'm also going to ask you, what of the 6 values of Sunrise resonates with you? And get to the heart of the values alignment between the prospective employee and the organization. From there, day 1, orientation. You can probably all, when we started a job, it was that first day of, it's kind of a coast day, but it's a very important day, and the values need to be present there. Because this is the beginning phase of, it's in everything we do, it's in every way, a part of every day in the organization. And then it becomes a thing of almost routine, but the fact is both the leadership and the board of the organization needs to be living the values of the organization, because even the slightest deviation will be seen and will have an impact on purpose and culture, and people will question. I would say that one of the most things that reinforces the purpose and the culture is not just the leadership, but what the leadership does in terms of measuring success. You measure what you treasure. If it's truly purpose, and it's truly the values of the organization, those will be your KPIs in your metrics. And then that's how success is measured. The thing that is great about this is that when you have this alignment, and the goal would be to have everybody in the organization 100% aligned, when that happens, your organization moves at a faster pace. It's more agile. There's more trust among people. And as a result of that, it becomes more successful. And success is not just in the dollars that are the result of the activities, it's in the actual impact that happens, because that reinforces the values and it speeds up the organization and it creates an awesome environment and a purposeful environment. And so it all begins with values and it ends with values, and that is the secret sauce.
Okay. Thank you, David. And I think you brought up a very interesting aspect, which is how do you actually measure culture and purpose? Not sure if that's really possible, but we can talk about that maybe later. But let me turn to Hadovik. Hadovik, Triodos Bank and Triodos Investment Management, it's an institution that is known, I think, to most of you as one of the global leaders in impact investing. And it also, and I've seen this again and again when I visited Triodos Bank in Zeist in the Netherlands, you have a very special culture. How is culture, a purposeful culture, being driven in Triodos Bank?
Well, thank you, Martin. I guess your story could have been my answer. Being on a different continent, it has the same elements, and that's good about being part of the network of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. There are so many similarities. We might not be the most well-known banks or the largest financial players. You probably are. But it really is amazing how we're driving this forward. And we're not doing it for us. We're really doing it for others to follow. So we're very open and transparent in our way of working because we like others to basically copy what we're doing. So back to your question, how we're driving that culture. You can talk hours about culture, right? For me, it's just what you do and how you do it as a person. And then the combination of all of that makes an organizational culture. And Patrick was saying the purpose lies in the past. Well, maybe a bit about Triodos in the past. We were founded back in the 80s, 4 founders, very simple idea, the conscious use of money. If you use money consciously, you make a deliberate decision where to invest it and where not. And we have decided to only invest the capital where it really contributes to people like us and to the planet. Full stop. I think we have a mission statement like on screen, but this simple idea is very intuitive. Everyone gets it. And we're now 43 years later, and it's driving every single decision we take. First and foremost, the investment decisions, so what we finance, according strict criteria, according methodologies that have developed over time, so it's no longer intuitive, but it's really replicable, it's conform what today in a regulated industry is needed. But the simple basic notion of only investing in what you think is relevant for the world, that's it. and that's what we do. And that comes to the values that came up yesterday, right? You have to invest in people. So like recruiting them, we have the same conversations. Not that we want everyone to be completely aligned with the values. You get a bit of a nasty, one single-minded sector or something. So you need opposing people that have different views about should we invest in nuclear, yes or no. Big debate in the Netherlands. We don't. But you can have another opinion. That's not the point. The point is, are your values aligned in terms of how would you see a society? And we think the most important values there are that people can develop in freedom, that they have equal access, and that they take responsibility for their actions. Very simple but very important values. And we do a lot of education on that as well to make sure that people also can flourish in expressing that and feeling comfortable in a corporate financial sector where that's not the norm.
Thank you, Hadewig. And I think what you're saying here is you do the right thing if you have the right values. And I think it goes back to what Patrick was saying before. Well, if you have those right values and you've got your priorities right, then you don't need all the regulation that's being put in place. And everything becomes much more easy. And I don't want to say it's going to be completely easy because you always will have tensions. But the values will help you sort out those tensions and find solutions and navigate those tensions in a more effective way. Abbas, now you're representing a bank that is operating in a much more challenging environment. You just came back from Kabul in July from a board meeting. We always value when we have input from First Microfinance Bank in Afghanistan, from our CEO Zia there. How is First Microfinance Bank Afghanistan managing to drive a purposeful culture in this very constrained and challenging environment that also has very strong cultural norms that are expected also from a bank?
Thanks, Martin. Well, challenging is quite an understatement from what people in Afghanistan are going through. But for the purposeful culture, I'll go back to the beginning when we started our operations in Afghanistan and other countries. We went into countries which were the least developed. In those countries, like Afghanistan, we went in areas and regions which were remote, which were rural, which were mountainous, where they were not on the top of the list of international institutions at the time. Even local institutions were hesitant to go into those areas. So we were dealing with people who had very little or literally no access to financial services. We were very particular at the time that when we start working with people, they learn to borrow responsibly. It was important that they do not believe that these are handouts. They should not become dependent on handouts. This is not charity. They should come to us, and they should come to us with pride and dignity, with respect, and that's how we would take it forward. And similarly for people working in the bank, that they should be lending responsibly. There should be a certain care for the people that you're working with. And you were providing them funding to make their basic needs. You were actually, it's not a cliche, you're actually there to build lives. You're actually there to improve the quality of life of people. And it was therefore very important as to how you did it and what you did. So creating the right culture, the right approach was critical. And you mentioned about measurement. You know, a lot of these things you talk about that they have an impact over the long term. 2 years ago, we actually got to see the long term. The changes which took place, the way the people reacted, the way our staff reacted, the way our customers reacted towards institution and in the community overall showed us the benefit of creating a culture of responsibility that we did from the very beginning.
The common thread I see here is really that the culture in a way leads to the success of the bank and the performance of the bank. Now I'd like to go a little deeper maybe, and Afghanistan certainly has a very different context than the countries that, let's say, Hadvig or David are operating in. But David, in your case in the United States, when I look from a European point of view, I feel sometimes the political atmosphere is highly charged. There's a lot of polarization. When we met at the annual conference of the Global Alliance for Banking and Values in New York in April this year, we had a first-hand opportunity to experience the challenging situation that the inequality and discrimination which is happening either systematically or maybe not systematically in the legal and economic and in the financial system. How can a bank like yours respond to that, and what role does Purpose play in that?
Thanks, Martin. And that's a great question. And one, again, very close to my heart. So Minneapolis was the scene of George Floyd. And quite frankly, that event happened a mile from my house and a mile from one of our branches and headquarters. And it was very personal because we work and live in those communities of which for years we have engaged in community and economic development. And so it was heartbreaking, quite honestly. It was really heartbreaking. And demonstrating just wasn't enough. And so I think the real place where a bank like ours can play a role in that inclusionary moment in time is to not overreact, because a lot of this, you can't think of it just as a moment of fear and a moment of violence in some cases. The fact is you need to take this from a movement standpoint. So the bank needs to double down in regards to our community and economic development. We need to find more and new partners in which to address the problems, and you need to dig deeper. And so you really need to find the responsibility as an institution, and then also reflect upon what does our institution look like? Do we represent the community? Can we do better? How do we look at the biases that we bring to the table every day, and how do we address that and be smarter as an entire organization from the top down? No matter who we are, we come with a certain set of perspectives, and we need to address those and understand the commonality that we have, and then drive the respect and drive the inclusionary behaviors as a result. The fact is that you begin to find new sources of not only money, but new colleagues in which to address these situations. And so it's in that moment that you begin to find success and some momentum, and you have to keep going, because it's not just that one event, it is a forever thing. And that's what I try to ingrain into our organization, is that racism and inequality is there, and we need to be there every day in which to do our best to be inclusionary, to really be the example of how to avoid this in the future. And so that, we think, builds the fabric of a community. And again, we're one actor and one business within the community, but we do have influence as a bank. We have a lot of customers who feel the same way and share the same values. So momentum.
Thank you, David. And Hadvig, you had said before Triodos Bank had this vision of using money consciously, and I think today, as I said before, you were probably one of the very first banks, at least that come to mind for me, that has been engaging in impact investing at a very early stage, and this even at a global scale. I think Triodos always had this global vision about using money consciously. How do you think the purpose has been driving you in that direction and has been able to give you that positioning today in the market?
Yeah, that's a question that I've been thinking myself. How come that the founders and now us still are doing it this way? And I guess I always end up, it's so common sense to do it this way. But there's more to it. And in Triodos, so we have launched many impact investment funds even before the term impact investing was coined. And the very first one started, I think every fund or every instrument that we launch is a response to what happened in society. So the first one, to give you an example, was the disaster with the nuclear plant in Chernobyl, 1986. That concern was already out there for a while. Same year, we started and financed the first wind turbine in the Netherlands. Really as a response to what can we do? We're concerned, but we're not a think tank, we're a bank. We need to offer products, we need to get people involved. And this opportunity, so there's an element of entrepreneurship with it as well, came and investing in the first wind turbine. And even today, in the energy transition that started in 1986, Triodos, and we're not a large player, let me emphasize that, but we're still globally the lead arranger in clean energy projects in number of deals we do. Because we keep pioneering, keep moving forward. What's needed for the energy transition? It's not only wind and solar. You need storage. You need efficiency initiatives. Let's look for them. Where are the entrepreneurs doing that? And probably that history or that purpose or whatever, that culture makes us go the extra mile. We really want to push this forward. And that's what we can do as financial sector. So that happened in energy transition. Same in the 80s, there was this big concern about our food system, how agriculture is destroying nature. That is not really from recent. We already knew. And I think, 1984, we granted our first loan to an organic farmer. We granted loans to organic retailers that were willing to sell it, bring it to the public. And over time, a fund was raised in 1990 on BioGround, and still today it's our largest green fund that we offer our clients. And the same happened with microfinance. We got into it via Women World's Banking, also back in the 80s. We learned about it. We didn't know, we didn't have the expertise. You don't always need to be full of expertise before you start doing. But you see something and you think that might be, that's my vision, it might be an answer to inequality, to lack of access to basic needs and everything. Let's try if we can do that. And we were in 1994, one of the first the commercial investors moving with others to finance or invest in microfinance. First on a small scale, today we would call it blended finance, but the idea is always to scale it up. And we not only need small funds, we need scalable institutional offerings as we have today for microfinance for over 15 years. And I think the last one in that sense, and it's always a bit unconscious, we started last year Child Lens Investing, basically because we get in touch with UNICEF. We started thinking about the framework, and something in us was saying there is something with the future generation. There is a concern out there. Their interests are not being dealt with in the financial sector. Something needs to happen there. We start small, and I just learned today is also the GIN in Copenhagen, and they're bringing the Child Lens Investing framework up there. So responding to what's happening outside, I think is the key why we have been successful in launching all of these instruments.
Thank you, Hadewig. It's something I observe when I travel and meet our members globally, that at the end of the day, it all starts with a challenge in the community, an issue, a social issue, an environmental issue, and we're looking for solutions. We're trying to address that solution. And I think that's what really probably sets many of the GABV member banks apart from banks that first look at what is the client demand and then develop a product around that client demand. So I think it's a very different starting point. Now, before I turn to Abbas with my next question, I just would like to ask you to already think what questions that you have. I'll be opening the floor in a moment. But before we do that, Abbas, I'd love to hear from you, because you're in a kind of a special situation. You're representing a bank in Afghanistan, but at the same time, you're also representing the largest investor into the first microfinance bank, Afghanistan. I think any other investor would have pulled out a long time ago from the bank you're representing. What is keeping Aga Khan Agency for Microfinance engaged? What's driving that?
Thanks, Martin. I mean, definitely, it was a difficult time 2 years ago. I won't say that that thought did not cross my mind. But you know, as problems are faced, I was talking to David earlier, that when you're faced with problems, it's best to just step back and see what needs to be done. We were tested, definitely. I would say we were a little bit prepared a couple of years or a year earlier by COVID. But then the difference is that was a challenge that was faced by every country in the world, by every institution in the world. This was a bit more unique, but it had prepared us a little bit. It had come as a shock for everyone on the ground, even people who then assumed power. But it comes back to the culture. We went into a country like Afghanistan, realizing, understanding that the challenges will be far beyond what we could imagine. And if we hadn't seen it so far, it didn't mean it could not have happened. Now it has happened. One important factor was the kind of support we got at the time. We were not alone. GABV was the first call I received. And every call I received, the question was, how can we help you? What can we do? FMO was another institution. We were faced with the situation. You know, one of the reasons you don't walk away, because the problems just keep coming up. One of the problems we faced was that overnight, we were told we cannot collect interest on our loans. And in most cases, we cannot even collect our loans because they're loans, and it is not allowed under the new thinking. So overnight that problem came in, we got support from FMO, who stepped in and said, look, we will help you. What do you need? And we said, we need to bring in Sharia-compliant infrastructure. Now, that's easier said than done. In my previous lives, I've seen it takes years to do that. Some institution I was working with 4 years ago, they're still working on it. We were told to have it that day. So it took us 9 months, but we were able to have policies, procedures, new products, systems which are amended, Sharia board, and all of this approved by the regulator. It was put in place. We've got institutions like IFC. So at a time like this, you also get to think and get to see how you can do this differently or better, building on what you have done. IFC is today helping us a lot in terms of how to digitalize and modernize and expand the business, let alone walk away from it. So walking away was really not a choice. It was not a choice because that is what we were there for. It was a choice because our partners would not let us think in those sense. And you know, when I mentioned earlier, we went in there to build lives. 2 years ago, the situation was that people needed to rebuild their lives. You don't walk away from the objective that you've gone there for. So that's kept us in there. And in fact, we've doubled up what we were doing, our efforts, and we were tested in many ways. We talked about understanding the customer, understanding our borrower. We talked about responsible borrowing, responsible lending. This is where the test came in. We had a population who, a lot of them had lost their homes. they had lost their source of income. There was absolute disruption in supply chains. And all of this had to be rebuilt. And you cannot pay back at a time when you're rebuilding your life. So we had to be patient as well. So we had to give time. And while the pace is slow, we moved forward. The direction is certainly there. We've seen pictures of people wanting to leave Afghanistan. But when you go to Kabul, yes, there are people, definitely, who want to leave for the sake of their children, for the sake of their lives, their families. But there is an overwhelming majority of people who want to stay. And either they don't have a choice or they don't want to leave. And they want to rebuild their lives in the country. And we went in there to work with them, so we're going to stay there to work with them.
Thank you, Abbas. I'm always fascinated listening to the challenges. It's just unfathomable for us, I think, here, for example, being based in Switzerland. I would love to hear from you, dear participants, what has brought you to this workshop, and what are the questions around purpose and values that are on your minds? Yesterday, we heard a couple of voices in the room, in the discussion, saying, well, we need to think about the values, we need to think about intentionality, about the holistic approach. Are there any voices or anyone would like to share some thoughts on this? Please. And please say your name and your organization. I'm not sure, do we have to press a button? I'm asking, yeah, there should be a button that needs to be pressed. Yeah.
Hi, Peter Neidecker. I just left a large federation of businesses based here in Geneva. My question is how we can, or you in your positions, you can better disseminate this values and purpose paradigm across your colleagues. And I know there are a lot of initiatives. It's amazing what's happened over the last 5 to 10 years with organizations such as yours that you've created. Patrick, you mentioned that purpose is really the raison d'être for an organization, and frankly, I'm really inspired by your speech, by the way, as well as all of your testimonials. And it's just so great to hear that we're coming. It seems like we're coming full circle back to what you call a raison d'être. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts. Triodos, of course, has been a pioneer for decades and has really served as a tremendous example. But are there ways that this can be better disseminated so that people do not just look to regulation as what I'm allowed and not allowed to do, and I'm going to push things to the limits because I'm allowed to do it, versus, what is the right thing to do? How can we more broadly disseminate across the financial community?
David, I can see you want to take the floor. But how do we? No, David, question. You start and kick off.
I do, because this is really where I think the most shiniest example on how to get people to follow a values-based world is to be successful, is to win, and to have impact. And it's in those moments that people go, I really want to do what they're doing, or I want to work there, or I want to be a part of that somehow. It's in that space and place, and you think, oh my gosh, you're doing all this values, mission stuff. How do you remain sustainable? The fact is, the more that you put out in terms of positive impact, whether it's environmental or social, more comes back, the more opportunities that come back. It's so, there's no regulation for that. But wanting to do good is really, quite frankly, ingrained in most of us. And in that purpose, there's tons of energy and there's tons of, I think, opportunities in if you can be in Afghanistan or be in Minneapolis and you face these big problems, within those big problems are absolutely big opportunities. And not only to do good, but to advance and to bring people together. And it's in that space that there is shared success of the community and the financial institution. And that's where I think the connection gets really made to say, gosh, there is something going on that's special. I want to go work for Triodos because they are just leading the way.
Thank you, David. And Hadovik, did you want to pick up on that as well, or?
Yeah, maybe. So there's only so much we can do as institutions. So we really have this notion of, okay, let's have the demonstration effect. Let's change or finance the change, but also let's change finance. Be very vocal, make everything open source, make everything on our websites to be copied. But you're right, there's only so much as we can do. And when I'm surrounded with impact investors or members of this global alliance, I do sense there is a very strong commonality, and that's really about the people working there in finance, but they have this sort of like-mindedness, not only here, not only on a conceptual form. At Triodos, a bit simple, but we call it this notion that these people have their head, their heart, and their hands connected. What I mean by it, they are really smart people everywhere. We have the best talents in the financial sector, I dare to say. We have very good people, all of us. We're a well-educated sector. So people having visions of what needs to be financed, how can we make it investable, how can we do it, structure it in a way that we can start. So the head needs to be there. What I see a lot of, that the heart is also with our organizations. And that sounds very soft, I'm sorry for that, but it's really the key differentiator. People bring their heart to their work, to the financial sector. And to be honest, when I used to work for the financial sector, I didn't see that so much. When I had one-on-one relationships with people, and we didn't talk about finance, there was a lot of heart. But as soon as we talk about investment decision, yes or no, why? Is this good enough? Is it profitable enough? There also the heart needs to come in. But their strong drive not to walk away, to go the extra mile, is really from the heart. Well, only head and heart is a bit, you should do a think tank. You need hands. You need doing and acting and being entrepreneurial. You need to not sit and wait for others to help you. There's a lot that you need to do. And I think that also is a lot in our organizations. We have doers. They're completely convinced, and they love attending also these conferences and really doing the deep dives in what is this urgency of climate change? What is this urgency of social lack of cohesion and all the problems we face? So their heart is really ticking for that. And at the same day, they come to work and they start acting. They start doing it without knowing. And without the doing, that entrepreneurship, you never bring new products to the market. You never start new financing, new stuff. So I think that's a little, it's too simple to be a secret. But in our education, maybe to disseminate, your question, how can we disseminate it more? I would like to see in education that we bring back our hearts to the financial sector. That's a very slick sentence, right? But it's the core of the matter for me. Does it make sense? Does it resonate?
I think it sums it up actually quite nicely. And thank you for bringing in that dimension. I think it's that passion, that leadership that we can observe every time when we come into a GABV meeting. It's that buzz and that energy that keeps us all going. Thank you for bringing that up.
Can I add one thing, Martin? This is not rocket science. This is what we all have in ourselves, and we're very privileged to work. We're well wired to work in the financial sector. So it's not difficult. Sometimes I think we make things a little bit too complicated, we were saying. Yeah. And yes, we need to deal with very complex situations, you even more and you than us maybe working in Europe and in emerging markets. But it's not rocket science. It's just being aware of it and doing it.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up as well. I think yesterday when we were in the meeting, we heard about there's climate dimension, there's the nature dimension, there's the social dimension, and we have these silos. And every time we try to take a technocratic approach, the compliance-based approach, the regulatory approach, and it's not going to work. We need a holistic approach, and I think that's where the values and the heart comes in, because that's the guiding compass that leads us to see a holistic solution rather than to operate in these silos.
And maybe then on the technocratic approach, yesterday a lot of people stated we need the data, we need the frameworks, we need the methodologies. I'm all in favor of it. I'm actually very much in favor of regulation. But please don't wait for data to take your investment decisions. As a human being, you already know what kind of agriculture is harming. You intuitively know. You need to find methodologies for that, and it takes time. I all understand that, but please don't wait for data.
Yeah. Speaking to the urgency of the challenge, just do it. Yes, please.
So going back to the heart, no? The financial industry is dominated by one demographic, so wouldn't it help to diversify the financial industry, the people that work in it?
Wouldn't it help if we had more diversity in the financial industry? And I couldn't agree more fully. And David, I think you just made a big effort to have a more diverse board as well. So do you want to?
Yes, well, I will profess that we are trying to have values alignment in who works in our organization, top to bottom. The diversity of thought is absolutely essential to bring about a holistic view of it, and the right perspective to say, do it. To say, you know, there's urgency in some things. The fact is go out, try it, and test it. And I really think the diversity of thought brings to the forefront, you get a holistic view of an issue or a problem quite quickly, or a loan request, and the fact is, can you act on it quickly? Either a yes or a no, maybe in some cases, but it's the diversity of thought that I think brings all the views to the table, makes for a better decision and a quicker one to really address issues that are out there. But I absolutely would agree that diversification amongst, and again, diversification means a lot of things. It means inclusion, it means disagreements, it means arguments. We have a saying, and it's called be candid but be caring. You know, the idea is you really need to hit the sensitive issue, and that's when I'll say an organization makes the biggest advancement forward, in that you really tackle an issue, you get to the root cause, and then you solve it permanently. But you have to go to a very vulnerable place, but you need all those perspectives at the table.
And sometimes there's also constraints from the outside. I mean, Abbas, I know that First Microfinance Bank Afghanistan used to have a very high share of female workers. I think it was more than 50%. And now I think, what is the situation under the new regime? Are you losing all that brain power? Or
Very, very good question, Martin, and also from the audience. I think we've seen, you know, like literally in everything, real-time experiences that you've gone through. I think you've all heard of the restrictions that have been placed in Afghanistan on women in various ways. They are today, I think, restricted from working for NGOs. There are restrictions within government. The banking sector is also a big sector in Afghanistan. And there was a big push to stop women from working in Afghanistan, in the banks. So some senior members of the government actually visited us, and we took them to a branch that we had, which was for women only. And where in a culture like that, you have to be able to provide your service to all communities and all sections of the society in a manner that they feel comfortable. So we had set up a branch which is run by a lady, staffed by ladies, and it meets the requirements of financing requirements, banking requirements of women. And we were able to show to them, you know, it is not necessary for you to stop everything. There is a way which meets your expectations, but also meets the needs and requirements of the society and the communities they're working in. And it resonated with them. It struck a chord that, yes, it's possible. What they did ask us was, then in all our other branches as well, we should have a special place for women. So yes, when I went there early in the year, I visited the branches, and they had a separate window. So one of the windows was allocated for women customers. It was staffed by a lady. We did. After that, we never had another push or instruction or request to either stop women from working or stop women from coming to the bank, either as staff or as customers. And it has worked well so far. So yes, we were very insistent on, as a board, as shareholders, that in that society, in fact, when we went to those rural areas, our big priorities is to provide financing and banking services to women. That's our first priority. That's how we got to 50% in terms of borrowing and in terms of financial services and accounts and staff as well. It's not 50% anymore. It's come down a bit, but nothing close to what we had originally feared. So yes, you have to use different approaches, and sometimes they work.
Thank you very much, Abbas. And I think our time is up. I know there's two more questions. I'll take one last question in the back, and then we will have to wind down the conversation. But I promise that we're all going to be around. We're happy to continue the conversation over coffee. So yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of World Minds, but I'm wearing the founder's hat of Afro Swisters, and my question specifically is on the question of ethnic diversity. And you, David, you mentioned beautifully how important, the question about race is to you. But what actions are you as a CEO taking in addressing this within your company? Thank you.
I will take that question. That's a fantastic question. So the specific actions of myself is I changed the board, and this may sound, this is maybe a very American perspective of this, but I own the bank. I bought it about 30 years ago, 28 years ago. And so as the majority shareholder, I maybe have a little undue influence over who's on the board. And so we have a majority female board. Sadly, that majority female board in the United States for a community bank only represents less than 2% of the entire bank's charters that are out there. So it's abysmal, quite frankly. So in the past 18 months, I changed the board from a gender perspective, and we're still a bit light relative to the ethnicity side. We're about 30% of people of color. And so that's one aspect of it. For me, I have maybe a unique ability in terms of designing products and finding needs. We created a product that helps undocumented individuals who are in our community get a home loan. And so we figured out a way through regulations and identification which to do so. We work with the Somali community and the Mexican community and the Hmong or Laotian community. So the idea is, you might say, well, each one has its intricacies culturally, and you're absolutely right. The easiest way to solve that is to hire them and to address them, because you begin to learn then that, let's say in the Hmong culture, there's a dialect of both white and green. And so there's always the unique and what I consider fascinating parts of different cultures and ethnicities, but it's being open to it and having a culture of respect for all that really allows it to flourish and to be celebrated, quite frankly. You should see when we have potlucks at our bank. It's joyful food from just a multitude of different cultures, and it's delicious. And so there's just different ways of thinking about it. But I think from my standpoint, the board was the majority of it. The hiring practices, we really did a deep dive. training throughout the organization, and then now we're getting more and more into products and services in terms of delivery.
Thank you very much, David. And I think, again, I think you can feel the enthusiasm of David. And I think it's, again, speaking from the heart. I would like to thank you all. I would first like to thank my colleagues here for joining me at this event. Thank you very much, Patrick Schmucki, for taking the initiative and bringing up the topic of purpose. It was actually Patrick who had initiated this workshop and suggested it to me, and I thought this is a fantastic idea. And also to you, dear participants, for joining us. We're still going to be around for a couple of minutes, and I'd love to meet you over coffee, and thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to learn more about the GABV, we too have a website, gabv.org. Just please go and have a look.